Well, hello everybody. How we doing today? I trust you're having a good morning already, that you had a good night's sleep, that you got rested, and that you're ready to go, because this is the day that the Lord has made, and we should rejoice and be glad in it. And I'm glad that you could be here and join me for another day of coffee with a pastor. So I hope everybody has their coffee cup, and you have your favorite coffee, and you have your favorite Bible or your study Bible, and I hope you got your notes, or your notepad. And it's good to see you all here today. By the way, in case you guys didn't know it, today is Pastor Ken's birthday. Make sure you text him or go on his Facebook page. He's 60 years old today. Pastor Ken's birthday today. A bunch of birthdays of people that I know today. So anyway, so here we are. We left off at the end of, as you know, we talked about the mark of the beast yesterday, and we left off at the end of chapter 13, beginning chapter 14. And so let me give you a quick overview, and let's just go back for a moment over everything that we've learned so far during this period of the past couple of chapters of the mid-tribulation. So number one, I just want to remind you that the trigger for all of these mid-tribulation events started with Satan being cast down from heaven. Number two, if you remember, after Satan is cast down, after he loses the war with Michael the archangel, he is bound to this earth, and he has to stay, and he no longer has access to heaven, and he knows that his time is short. Number three, if you remember, Satan begins to fight against the saints and against the Jewish people, and he attacks the believing Jews, the Messianic Jews, and the Lord protects them with in a fortress area in the desert in Israel. And so because of that, number four, Satan seeks a new strategy, beginning with orchestrating the appearance, the death, and the resurrection of the Antichrist. Number five, if you remember, we talked about how the Antichrist was killed in Jerusalem by 3 kings, but then he is resurrected, and his resurrection stuns the whole world. And as you remember, he proclaims himself, and everybody proclaims him as a savior. Number 6, if you remember, we talked about Antichrist's first act is to kill these 3 kings that tried to kill him and the 2 witnesses in Jerusalem. And then he enters into the rebuilt Jewish temple in Jerusalem. Number 7, we talked about how in the temple, Antichrist then declares himself to be God, puts an end to Judaism as we've known it for thousands of years, puts an end to the practice of Judaism, and he eventually leaves Jerusalem to complete his conquest of the whole wide world and to persecute the saints and everybody else who will not follow him. But before he goes, he raises up a second man to be the false prophet, who, as we remember, in Antichrist's presence, he possesses great power. And then if you remember, we talked about number 9, how the false prophet tells the whole world to worship the Antichrist, and he sets up an image of the Antichrist in the temple so that people could focus their worship on Antichrist instead of what they were worshiping. That's the abomination that causes desolation. And then number 10, Antichrist institutes this new religious order for the whole world and tells everybody that they are required to take a mark in order to buy or sell, and those who are refused the mark cannot buy or sell, and they are executed. So that's what we've learned through chapter 13. So now let me just set the scene for you, what we're going to be looking at, the first couple of verses here in chapter 14. And let me give you a brief transition, so to speak, of events. So now I want you to remember that Number one, the false prophet now requires all humanity to worship the Antichrist and to take a mark on their body, their hand or their forehead. And if they do not worship the Antichrist, they are killed. Remember that. And so remember, if they don't take the mark, they can't buy or sell either. Remember that because of these requirements put on by the false prophet, that puts people between a rock and a hard place. Because on one hand, if you refuse the mark, you cannot buy or sell, and you die. But on the other hand, if you take the mark, you will be forever excluded from the possibility of receiving salvation from God. So that in turn brings me to the fourth thing about this transition, is that everybody in the world has got to make a choice. And now they've got to make a public declaration for or against Antichrist. There's no room for undecideds. There's no independence. You're either one or the other. And we know that there's going to be great persecution because of this. But there is one group, one more distinct group, that will never ever take the mark of the beast, and so they too will be persecuted. But unlike the earlier groups, none of this group will survive the tribulation. In fact, 100% of this group is going to be martyred. We talked about them back in chapter 7, but now we're going to talk about them again here in chapter 14. And this group is the 144,000 that were sealed of God, sealed for the first 3.5 years of the tribulation period. The male Jewish evangelists that began the work of spreading the gospel of salvation during the first 3.5 years of the tribulation period. And so this is where, in the whole of the story, not just chapter 13, but the whole of the story, this is where we left off, or where we leave off. And now that we've had all this filler material since chapter 7, when we saw the sealing of the 144,000, now here we are in chapter 14, and we finally get to see what happened to them. It doesn't tell us a lot about what's gone on in between. We just know that they are sealed, that the devil can't touch them for the first 3.5 years, and that their job is to go out and evangelize like never before. We never get to hear stories like we do in the book of Acts. So then here we are, and we're going to look at verses 1 through 5 in chapter 14. And it says, "And then I looked, and there before me was the Lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a sound from heaven like the roar of rushing waters and a loud peal of thunder. And the sound I heard was like that of harpists playing their harps. And they sang a new song before the throne and before the 4 living creatures and the elders. No one could learn that song. This is important. No one could learn that song except the 144,000, and I have this underlined in my Bible, who had been redeemed from the earth. These are those who did not defile themselves with women, for they kept themselves pure. They followed the Lamb wherever he goes. They were purchased from among men and offered as firstfruits to God and the Lamb. No lie was found in their mouths. They are blameless." Okay. So now, everybody take a sip, would you? So now, John's vision transitions to this new scene of the Lamb, Jesus, standing on Mount Zion. And just so you know, Mount Zion is a real mountain or hill that's directly south of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and it's there. So at first glance, we might assume that John was witnessing Jesus actually standing on the earth, but we know that Jesus hasn't returned yet. That's not true. So that raises questions of where the place, and we're going to answer this as we move ahead. And then next we see the 144,000 standing with Jesus, having the name of their Father written on their foreheads. Now, obviously, this group of 144,000 Jewish men is the set of these guys back in Revelation 7 when they were commissioned and marked with the seal of the living God. And we know that their mission was to bring the multitudes, just as many as they can. I'm believing God is going to be millions, that they bring millions to faith in Jesus. But like I said, since then, since chapter 7, we haven't heard about these guys at all. Everything has been happening, but we haven't, they've been like working behind the scenes. But now, as we reach the middle of the tribulation period, we find them standing with Jesus on Mount Zion. So where is this taking place? Of course, in heaven, because there's many scripture references that reference heaven as being called Mount Zion, both in the Old and in the New Testament. I'm not going to read them today just to save us some time. And then John says that this 144,000 begin singing before the throne of God and before the creatures, the living creatures, and before the elders, and that they were the only ones that knew how to sing this song. Isn't that pretty amazing? And it makes you think, well, what are they singing? Well, I have a pretty good idea, because the living creatures and the elders, they never went through what these guys went through. They never had to put up with what these guys have put up with. I imagine it's going to be a song about the amazing grace of God and the amazing power and the amazing salvation of God. And so, why is John being shown this scene of the 144,000 in heaven with Jesus at this point in the tribulation period in the middle? Because I want to go back to verse 3, and I said this earlier. It says that they are described as those who are purchased from the earth. Because to be purchased from the earth is a clear indication that they have left the earth and have arrived in heaven. Now, this is like a rapture of the 144,000. And how else do you explain these sealed individuals being raptured? And they were purchased, which means they were redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. So, in my opinion, here in this set of verses, we really have to conclude that these guys were killed, they were redeemed, and they were removed from the earth and now brought to heaven. And they entered heaven because they believed in Jesus. And then here in verse 4, I believe it gives the reason for their death when it says they were the first fruits for God. So I think they're in heaven. They were killed after their job was over, after their 3.5 years of preaching the gospel like never before. They were killed, they died, and then they were the first and the best of the martyrs that are going to follow during the last 3.5 years of the tribulation. And not only that, but they were a privileged group because they were first to receive faith, if you remember. And after the rapture happened and the Christians were gone, these 144,000 get saved, get marked by the seal of God. He sends them out to preach on the earth for 3.5 years like never before. They're killed, and God removes them, like raptures them, like a second rapture from the earth. And so if you think about it, They were the first to spread the gospel after the rapture happens. And they were set apart, like it says here in chapter 14, from earthly pleasures like being married, so that they could totally dedicate themselves to serving Jesus. Now, I want to say to all the ladies here that are watching, and to all the men, where it says these are those who did not defile themselves with women, for they kept themselves pure. That is not saying that being with a woman defiles you, because we all know that marriage was God's idea. Marriage is a good thing, and having a physical relationship with women is a good thing, not a bad thing, except when you are told that you are not to do that, and that your only focus, kind of like people in the Catholic Church or other religions where they don't allow their priests, or their, like, nuns can't get married, most priests can't get married. There are a few exceptions. And so, I just wanted to clear this up, that it's not bad to be with a woman, but it's bad to break your vow, or to break the requirements that God has put on you, okay? And so we are told that they have not been with women, and we are told that they were single-minded to their task. We are told that they dedicated themselves to Jesus. We understand that they obediently followed Jesus wherever he asked them to go, and they did what he asked them to do. And then we're told in verse 5 that they never lie, which is a powerful testimony of their moral character, because there's probably not a person on the earth who could say that they have never lied. So, simply put, these guys, these 144,000, they were models of Christianity. They were models of servanthood. They were models of selflessness. They were models of obedience. And they were models of being a servant of Jesus here in their short time on the earth. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us if they were 144,000 sealed teenagers. It doesn't say if they were 20-year-olds or 30-year-olds or 40-year-olds or 50-year-olds or 60 or whatever. It doesn't say if it was a mixture of an age group. It doesn't tell us their age. It just tells us the other things about them. It's one of the things I wish I knew was, were they young guys? Or were they middle-aged guys? Or were they old guys, like me, in their 60s? And then, to further put grace on them, the Lord allowed them to be the first martyrs and removed them before the great tribulation period, the worst period, the last 3.5 years happened. So the 144,000 were sealed to protect them from God's wrath and judgment in the first 3.5 years. And then evidently this sealing is removed so that they are allowed to be martyred. Their time for evangelism has come to an end, and for all destinies of the people of the earth to be set for eternity, either one way or another. And by their example, the remaining saints will have encouragement to know that their death is nothing to fear, because the remaining people are going to know that these guys were killed and resurrected or raptured up into heaven. And so with the Antichrist demanding that everybody take a stand one way or another, everybody has to decide which way they're going to go. And so then, here's the question. Who is left to save? Well, it is amazing that in his amazing grace, the 144,000 are gone. There's no preachers left on the earth, no official preachers, right? The ones that God, but there's still people being saved, all right? So it is amazing that the Lord is going to offer a very final opportunity for the world to believe, and the offer comes from a very unsuspecting place. And we're going to talk about that tomorrow on Thursday. Okay? Well, thanks for joining me today for Coffee with the Pastor. And just like every day, I pray the Lord's blessing on you, the Lord's health on you, the Lord's protection on you, God's prosperity on you, the Lord's anointing on you. I pray the Lord will give you peace today, make you prosperous, and let's ask that God use us to reach people, as many as we can. Let's grow not only our church, but let's grow the church in the world today while we still have time. So thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you tomorrow morning for Coffee with the Pastor. God bless you guys.